Hello, I'm your host, Marcus Ruiz Evans, CEO of Yes, California, and founder of the CalExit movement since 2011. Well, recently we covered the 4 steps to any activist movement achieving success as identified by the greatest activist of all time, the Mahatma Gandhi. First, they ignore you. Second, they laugh at you. Third, they fight you. And then fourth, you win. A link to that video is in the description below. It's called The California Nationalist. The System is Scared and has revealed how we can win separation, where we covered the Mahatma's steps to any social movement achieving success and then compared it to the current discussion around national divorce. We will now cover how another world-famous activist outlined the key steps to success for a social justice movement, no one less than the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We will compare his 4-step path to success to the current discussion around national divorce, and we will determine where along MLK's 4-step process the discussion around national divorce is. We will use our over 10 years of experience here at Yes, California in activism to inform our analysis for you, the viewer, and we will use information from scholars who are much closer to the topic of MLK and his 4 steps to guide our understanding. Well, let's get right to it. Martin Luther King Jr. was perhaps the most famous activist in all of America. And while there were many other people in the social movement of the 1960s to give African Americans their deserved rights in American history, like Rosa Parks, and the college students from that area who protested at the Woolworth's lunch counter, famously, MLK was perhaps the most famous of all of them at this time. And MLK said, because of his wisdom, he had looked at nonviolent social movements, he was familiar with Gandhi's movements, and he had also studied a little bit about this by other college professors who were talking about nonviolent social movements around the time. Now, MLK came up with his own 4-step process to win. And he said this applies to any nonviolent campaign if they want to win. He outlined these steps in an act of exasperation when he was locked up in a Birmingham jail. In his famous letter from a Birmingham city jail, MLK said these were the 4 steps to success for any movement. Quote, a collection of the facts to determine whether injustices are alive. Negotiation, self-purification, and direct action. So, a collection of the facts to determine whether injustices are alive. Negotiation, self-purification, and direct action. These are the 4 steps that King outlined in his letter from a Birmingham city jail. The collection of facts means you determine whether the injustice exists and you describe it. A negotiation is where there's a dialogue between the two people, the protesters and the system who's perceiving the injustice against them. Self-purification means people attend workshops and they prepare to face the consequences of protesting. And finally, direct action, of the 4th step, according to King, on the path to success, is when community members actually march in public to highlight the injustice. I want to bring your attention to negotiation, the 2nd stage out of the 4-step process with King. This is what some of the scholars around King said that he meant by that. Negotiation is the art of bringing together your views and those of your opponent to arrive at a just conclusion or clarify the unresolved issues, at which point the conflict is formalized. The key point here, the conflict is formalized. So King was pointing out when you get to negotiation, that's when things actually kick off. It's a 4-step process. The 2nd step, negotiation, is when the conflict is formalized. Both sides agree this is what we're upset about. And everybody kind of agrees this is the issue. For example, you can't have an abortion debate unless you know that people are against abortion or for it. You can't have a gun debate unless you know people are for guns or not. Now, I know that seems a little bit oversimplified, but when you look at any issue, there's a period where it's codified. What are we talking about? What's your side saying? What's my side saying? How do we disagree? And they're not quite clear what the issues are. And then over time, the both sides clash and they come to some sort of conclusion as to what it is they are in opposition to each other about. Now, the key thing here is they're not agreeing on the solution. They're just saying, you're for X, I'm for Y, we both agree you're X and I'm Y, and our conflict is whether X is better than Y. It takes forever for people in a social movement to get to that point. And when you do, it's key. It means you're on the path to success. Again, something I've told a lot of activists, just because the system's fighting you or is pushing back doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. You're actually winning. So here's the system fighting back, and it's called negotiation. As King would describe it, it would be called they fight you, which is stage 3 for Gandhi. So stage 2 for King, stage 3 for Gandhi. Now, as we talked about with Gandhi, we here at Yes California believe America is at the fight stage of Gandhi's 4 steps to success, because the system chose to move past ridicule and making people feel ashamed about even discussing the topic of national divorce to full-blown attack. Between October 7th and the 14th, there were many articles talking about how national divorce was a laughable topic. Then on October 12th to the 15th, the system seemed to shift the way it described the topic of national divorce from laughable to horrifically stupid. We pointed out how Rich Lowry for the National Review printed an article called National Divorce is a Poisonously Stupid Idea around October 8th. That article was reprinted in 30 different small town newspapers to make it appear as though all of America was thinking this way about the topic of national divorce. We also pointed out that this article had different titles, from, quotes, "A Surprising Share of Americans Wants to Break Up the Country, Here's Why They're Wrong," by Rich Lowry on October 6th, to "An American National Divorce is a Foolish, Dangerous Fantasy," by Rich Lowry on October 7th, to the final iteration of "National Divorce is a Poisonously Stupid Idea" by Mr. Lowry on October 8th. It's the exact same article, but they changed the titles and the framing because most people don't read the article, they read the title, over 3 days. The title changes from "Ignore" to "Laugh" to "Be Terrified of," and then the final title, the system allowed it, and not the previous 2 versions, to be printed in 30 newspapers. So you see the same article, it changes titles over days. The last version of the title is the one they print in 30 newspapers across America around October 8th to the 12th, so that if you were looking at the topic of national divorce, 6 pages of Google results would appear to be people from 30 different newspapers around America, from Oregon to Mississippi, saying that national divorce is a poisonously stupid idea. That is the system attacking. Now let's get to this a little bit more. So this was the system attacking, that they are attacking the idea of national divorce according to Gandhi's 4-step process. So, Martin Luther King's 4-step process. So now let's compare the same information about national divorce is being covered, that we can say the system is in the negotiation phase according to MLK's 4-step process. So again, the collection of facts in which it is determined whether the injustice exists. That's step 1. Step 2, negotiation, in which there is a dialogue between the 2 sides, the art of bringing together your views and those of your opponent to arrive at a just conclusion or to clarify the unresolved issues, at which point the conflict is formalized. Conflict is formalized. Step 3, according to MLK, self-purification, in which people attend workshops and are prepared to face the consequences of protesting. And finally, step 4, direct action, in which the community marches in public to highlight the injustice. Now, looking at Rich Lowry's article, Lowry is a well-known conservative who writes for the National Review, a well-known conservative publication. His attack on national divorce was discussed by 2 well-known conservatives in itself. So Rich Lowry, well-known conservative, writes for National Review, well-known conservative publication, and he's attacking the idea of national divorce. In response, 2 other well-known conservatives attack his attack. So Michael Malice, on October 11th, wrote an article called Dissecting National Review's Article Against National Divorce, and Brion McClanahan, on October 20th, wrote an article, Rich Lowry Doesn't Like Secession. We can see fellow conservatives attacking Rich Lowry's attack on national divorce. Now, this may seem anticlimactic, but it's very key. Clearly, the system was attacking the concept of national divorce with Rich Lowry. We've already established that. It laid out its arguments in Rich Lowry's article. We know this when we know the system was using Lowry's article to attack, because that article and none of the other ones that were laughing at or attacking the topic of national divorce were reprinted 30 times. There were many authors laughing at the topic of national divorce, and there were many authors attacking the topic of national divorce. But Rich Lowry's article was the only one to be printed in National Review, and then Politico, another magazine on the complete opposite political spectrum, and then printed 30 times in local newspapers around America. So that's clearly the system saying, we like his arguments best. These are the main arguments. Now, what happened in response was 2 well-known conservatives responded to that. What we have just witnessed now is the negotiation phase of Martin Luther King's 4-step process. Here's the system. I want to be in charge. I don't like what you're doing because of these reasons. Here's conservatives that are also well-known saying, I recognize your reasons, and I argue with them. Remember, they don't have to come to terms on a solution. They just have to agree that these are the issues. So we have now seen conservatives talk about national divorce and trash it with the system portraying those articles. And then we have seen other conservatives launch back and attack into that. What we're seeing is the negotiation phase, according to MLK. This is the process of negotiation where one side says, here are the issues, and the other side seems to accept that those are the issues. They still disagree on what to do, but they agree on what the problem between the two sides is. The reason that I think this is significant is that this never happened to CalExit. We got very big with Donald Trump in November 2016. And from December 2016 to January 2017, there were articles discussing CalExit in a silly but non-threatening manner. Then in February to March 2017, everything changed. Rachel Maddow famously celebrated us and then attacked us. At that same time, there were many articles saying why CalExit would not be a good idea. Now, some of the arguments that they laid out were, it would be bad for democracy, to show that if you don't get the results that you want in an election, you just, quote, take your ball and go home. The other major argument was that if California left, it would be abandoning minorities in red states. But the argument that the system seemed to gravitate to the most was that California could not secede without a constitutional amendment. In February and March 2017, through into the next year of mid-2018, so February 2017 to mid-2018, a year later, there were multiple college professors from multiple California universities who would be interviewed and asked one question. Would it require a constitutional amendment for California to secede? And they said yes. This argument was repeated over and over again, just like Rich Lowry's article, National Divorce is a Poisonously Stupid Idea, was reprinted in 30 newspapers. So, the system doesn't like talking about national divorce. They have a bunch of articles saying, let's laugh at this, let's ignore it. And then they have a bunch of articles saying, let's attack this. They pick one of those articles and they reprint that in 30 newspapers. They don't do that with any of the other ones. Travel back in time 5 years to 2017. The system is saying, CalExit's a bad idea, you're going to abandon minorities, it's bad for democracy. But the thing they seem to settle on is that it would require a constitutional amendment or 3/4 of all of the Congress members and the states to approve it, which they said was a seemingly impossible task. Like Lowry having his argument printed 30 times, we had 30 college professors push this one argument on multiple TV stations and newspapers in California. You can see the parallels. We at Yes California said that's not true. What these professors are saying. Texas versus White is the only Supreme Court case on secession, and it says you can secede with the consent of the states, and consent was never defined. We pointed out how Erwin Chemerinsky, a dean of 2 University of California law schools, and possibly the best scholar on the Constitution in California, said that a simple 51% majority of Congress could qualify, but no one would take up our talking points. Famous people who celebrated the idea of CalExit like Shervin Piscovar and Peter Thiel, the billionaires, and Thomas Middleditch of Silicon Valley would say nothing in response to the argument attacking the idea of CalExit. So you had famous people talking about CalExit, but then when the system responded with its counterpoint, there was no famous people pushing back. That's why national divorce is pushing past the point where CalExit stalled. Famous people are taking up the main counter argument of the system and are responding. We never had people of political reputation responding to the main attack from the system. Therefore, I think it is a special moment in history of the movement for national divorce, and I think it spells the point that MLK would call negotiation, where the two sides agree to what this problem is. We were attacked. We tried to counterattack and respond. None of the people who celebrated us would join in that discussion with the counterattack. Therefore, we never got to the negotiation phase of MLK. However, when we're looking at national divorce, that's not the same case. Rich Lowry seems to be the guy who's speaking for the system. That's being printed in 30 different newspapers, just like we had, you must have an amendment said by 30 different professors. But difference is that we were the only ones pushing back against those professors in the media, and now we have famous conservatives pushing back against famous conservatives. So national divorce has achieved the step of negotiation as identified by MLK's 4 steps, whereas CalExit did not. The next step, according to King, was self-purification after negotiation, which means you recognize there's a problem and you do soul-searching to see if you are up for what it would take to fix the problem. Finally, you take action. You actually protest. King and his followers thought hard for months about how much violence they could tolerate, boycotting busing in the Deep South, and then finally they decided to hold a bus boycott or sit at the Woolworth's lunch counter. The thing is that those actions worked at that time when people congregated around physical locations, and things are different now. Marjorie Taylor Greene, the sitting member of Congress, showed us what direct action for activist movements around national divorce looks like. She held a poll on Twitter where she only asked the question of if people are supportive of national divorce. She didn't even give her opinion of the poll initially and just asked a question. That made the topic legitimate, which is what the opposite of what the system wants. Marjorie Taylor Greene has also spent the last year dealing with withering criticism of her tenure in Congress and probably already had to do some soul searching of if she's up for the fight, even before she launched this poll. So self-purification. Are you really up for the abuse that's going to come? We saw Marjorie Taylor Greene deal with this over the last year. So she was tough as nails and ready for direct action, which was taking her Twitter feed as a Congress member and asking a highly controversial question. So she did the last two steps King said you would need to do. And that's key. The point is that we are in the negotiation phase of the topic of national divorce. The issue is codified. The conflict can now begin, as King would say. The next step is soul searching. Are you up for being hated on the discussion of national divorce? And finally, the next step after that is direct action, talking publicly about national divorce. This may seem overly simple, but it is key. MLK outlined the process for us to win. We know what step we are in now, and I just provided to you examples of how to achieve the next two steps as outlined by a sitting Congress member. These are key information, and I hope you'll continue to be part of this discussion around national divorce. We need people to shore up their courage within themselves. Only you can do that. That's the self-purification stage. And then finally, you'll need to do the direct action stage. Say what you will about Marjorie Taylor Greene, but I think she showed us the way. The direct action to take for national divorce is to simply keep discussing it and make it seem legitimate and be ready for whatever the system throws at you. And that is how we will win, according to Martin Luther King Jr. Thank you and good night.